The age of the dinosaurs spanned the Mesozoic era, often called the Age of Reptiles, which lasted around 186 million years. This era is divided into three periods: the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. While dinosaurs existed throughout all three, they did not dominate from the beginning. The Mesozoic era began 252 million years ago with the Triassic period, but at that time, dinosaurs had not yet evolved. Even by the end of the Triassic, they were not the dominant megafauna and were much smaller and less significant than the titanic species of later periods. It wasn't until the early Jurassic, around 201 million years ago, that dinosaurs began their rise to dominance. Because of this, Triassic dinosaurs are often overlooked. Popular media, books, games, films, frequently showcase Jurassic and Cretaceous giants like Tyrannosaurus rex and Brachiosaurus, while rarely including Triassic species. Names like Coelophysis, Plataeosaurus, and more recently Herrerasaurus are known mainly to enthusiasts, not the general public. Despite their obscurity, the dinosaurs of the Triassic were remarkable creatures that deserve recognition. This video aims to spotlight this often ignored chapter in dinosaur history. We'll explore the Triassic world they inhabited, highlight the major dinosaur lineages and notable species, examine their early geographic spread, and trace their eventual rise to power. The Triassic world. The world of the first dinosaurs was vastly different from today. All the continents were joined together into a single supercontinent called Pangaea. Global temperatures were much warmer, and the climate was more extreme and arid, marked by harsh dry seasons, widespread wildfires, and massive monsoons, caused by how Pangaea disrupted global wind patterns. Vegetation, though recognizable in some ways, was radically different from what we know today. Modern flowering plants, including grass, had not yet evolved. Instead, conifers, cycads, and ferns dominated the landscape. In the oceans, a variety of marine reptiles had already taken hold, such as the dolphin-like ichthyosaurs and lesser-known species like thalattosaurs. Freshwater environments were inhabited by large temnospondyl amphibians and early frogs. The first true lizards also appeared during the Triassic, although their ancestors stretched further back in time. Life before the dinosaurs. When the Triassic began, dinosaurs were not the dominant land animals. That role belonged to synapsids, ancestors of mammals. These proto-mammals had been the top predators and herbivores during the earlier Permian period and continued to thrive in the early Triassic, despite suffering major losses in the Great Dying Mass Extinction event that marked the end of the Permian. Among the most prominent Triassic synapsids were the dicynodonts, large tusked herbivores with beak-like mouths, and the cynodonts, a more diverse group that included the direct ancestors of mammals. Another lesser-known group, the therocephalians, persisted into the Middle Triassic before going extinct. As the Triassic progressed, reptiles began to overtake synapsids in size and diversity. Early reptiles were generally small, but a group known as archosauromorphs, relatives of both dinosaurs and crocodilians, started to rise. Many of these reptiles likely had elevated metabolisms, allowing for greater activity than typical cold-blooded species. The rise of archosauromorphs quickly diversified. They included herbivores like allocotosaurs and rhynchosaurs, aquatic predators such as Vancleavia, and the crocodile-like phytosaurs. The most successful of these were the archosaurs, reptiles that descended from the last common ancestor of dinosaurs and crocodilians. However, dinosaurs were not the dominant archosaurs during most of the Triassic. That title went to their cousins, the pseudosuchians, the ancestors and relatives of modern crocodiles. Contrary to the slow, semi-aquatic image of crocodilians today, Triassic pseudosuchians were highly diverse. They included heavily armored etosaurs, sail-backed paposauroids, ferocious rauisuchids, small, fast-running ancestors of crocodiles. Many of these animals looked strikingly similar to dinosaurs. This resemblance wasn't just due to their shared ancestry, but also because they occupied similar ecological roles. By the bipedal shovosaurids, who paleontologists initially mistook as ornithomimus or dinosaurs, Even before true dinosaurs came onto the scene, members of their branch of Archosauria, Ave metatarsalia, were rare until the late Triassic period. The earliest examples of these stem dinosaurs are the medium-sized predatory Aphanosaurs. The rest of the Ave metatarsalians belonged to the clade or Nithodera. Besides dinosaurs, Ornithidera also includes the flying pterosaurs, who were often mistaken for dinosaurs. Themselves, ornithiderans started out as tiny insect eaters, a stark contrast to the famous titans of the future. This is even more striking since at the beginning of the Triassic, the archosauromorph ancestors of the archosaurs and therefore dinosaurs were large predators. Not the more abundant pseudo-lizards, the oldest fossils of these diminutive proto-dinosaurs and proto-pterosaurs are footprints dating to the early Triassic. It should be noted the first ornithiderans were already quite bird-like, which was also true for the earliest dinosaurs. The more reptile-like appearance of many later dinosaurs was a consequence of them growing so massive dinosaurs, and those ornithiderans more closely related to them than pterosaurs belonged to the clade Dinosauromorpha. Many dinosaur morphs such as Legosukis and Saltopus looked very similar to true dinosaurs, and already possessed most of the traits which set them apart from other reptiles. The reason they are not all simply considered dinosaurs is because of how Dinosauria is defined. It is declared formed by 3 smaller clades and all the descendants of their last common ancestor. These are Theropoda, which includes birds, and most of the carnivorous dinosaurs, Sauropoda morpha, which contains the massive long-necked sauropods and smaller prosauropods, and Ornithischia, which includes a number of herbivorous dinosaurs, like the not-quite duck-billed hadrosaurs, the horned ceratopsids, and the armored ankylosaurs. This makes the question of when the first dinosaur evolved a bit of a technicality, since the first true dinosaur was not substantially different from its dinosauromorph predecessors. For years, the oldest reliably identified and dated dinosaurs were the tiny Eoraptor and the larger Herrerasaurus. Their fossils are from the Argentinian Ishigo Wall Stowe Formation, which is dated to around 231, 5 million years ago during the Carnian age of the late Triassic. Similar dinosaurs, including Nandumiram and Nephoverax, have been found in the Brazilian Santa Maria Formation and have recently been dated to 233 million years ago. These early South American dinosaurs were far less diverse than those dinosaurs from the end of the Triassic. Let alone the following periods, all of them superficially resembled theropods, although few, if any, truly belonged to the group. Instead, the last common ancestor of all dinosaurs from the gigantic sauropods to the armored ankylosaurs is thought to have looked more or less like a small theropod. Still, there are enough differences between these Carnian dinosaurs to suggest the oldest dinosaur is likely at least a few million years older. One of the Ishigoasto dinosaurs, Eodrameus, is often seen as the best representative of what this first dinosaur looked like. It was a small predator only 1.5 meters long, not much longer than his dinosaur morph ancestors or a tyrannosaurid hatchling like them. Eodrameus was restricted to small prey including insects and tiny vertebrates, such as the reptile Tatalura. Like most other archosaurs, Eodrameus had 5 fingers, however 2 of them were very tiny, which was true of most other early dinosaurs. The exception to this rule were the theropods, whose definitive members only had 4 fingers during the Triassic, and often fewer in later periods. Perhaps the largest controversy relating to early dinosaur evolution is how the 3 major clades are related to each other. It was once accepted that the theropods and sauropodomorphs were more closely related to each other than to the ornithischians being united under the larger clade Saurischia. This consensus was challenged in 2017, and after much debate it was concluded that there is currently insufficient evidence to determine which of the 3 dinosaurian clades split off first. For the purposes of this video, it will be assumed that the traditional Saurischia model of dinosaur evolution is basically correct. However, the silosaurids, who were once placed outside of Dinosauria, will be considered ornithischians, while Herrerasaurs, who were once thought to be theropods, will be treated as their own 4th clade. The Herrerasaurs looked basically like theropods to the degree they were once considered early members of the group. After more recent examination of their anatomy and the anatomy of other early dinosaurs, it is not even certain if the Herrerasaurs were true dinosaurs or merely closely related dinosaur morphs. Today, Herrerasaurs are commonly classified as early diverging saurusians. This means that they may be closely related to theropods and sauropodomorphs. but do not belong to either group, unlike all definitive Triassic theropods. Herrerasaurs had 5 fingers instead of 4, although both groups only had 3 non-vestigial fingers, so their basic functionality was the same. The most iconic Herrerasaurs are the Herrerasaurids, who were among the first Carnian dinosaurs. They had boxy skulls and looked almost like off-brand Jurassic Park raptors. The possibility that they were primarily scaly only increases the resemblance. The Herrerasaurids, Stoicosaurus, and the previously mentioned Nephovorax lived in the Brazilian Santa Maria Formation and are among the oldest known dinosaurs. 2 slightly younger Herrerasaurids, San Juansauros and Herrerasaurus itself, are found in the Issue-Guelsto Formation. All of the named Herrerasaurids lived in South America, but Herrerasaurid fossils have also been found in Africa and possibly Poland for such early dinosaurs. They were remarkably deadly, possessing a stocky build and often reaching a length of 3 meters. Some adult Herrerasaurus were about the same size, but the largest known individual was between 5 to 6 meters long, while this may have been a second larger species of Herrerasaurus. The growth rate of most Triassic dinosaurs was variable, which helped them to adapt to the all-too-frequent droughts. Either way, the largest Herrerasaurus obtained greater size than perhaps any other predatory dinosaur during the Triassic period, and was actually larger than the Jurassic Park raptors. Still, even it was outclassed by the contemporary carnivorous Pseudosuchianthropus. Despite their early success, the Herrerasaurids seem to have gone extinct only a few million years after they first appeared during the Carnian age. The possible Herrerasaurid fossils found in Poland may extend their range by over 15 million years, but at best they seem to have been overshadowed by theropods. 3 other Herrerasaurids have been found that are not Herrerasaurids. These 3 dinosaurs, Chintosaurus, Tawa, and Demonosaurus, may form a clade with each other, but this is currently unclear. All 3 of these Herrerasaurs lived in North America after the apparent extinction of the Herrerasaurids. The fragmentary Chintosaurus fossils suggest a length of 2 meters, while more complete Tawa specimens are 2.5 meters long, although within the range of Herrerasaurids, Tawa had a more elongated skull, placing it in a niche closer to that of the contemporary theropods. Still, even if it was smaller than Herrerasaurus and lived in fear of pseudosuchian predators like Postersuchus, Tawa had risen much higher in the food chain than the first dinosaurs like Eoraptor. The most unusual Herrerasaurid was Demonosaurus. It had a short, round skull which held the proportionally largest teeth of any other dinosaur, of course, in life. These impressive teeth may have been obscured behind lips due to the lack of a modern analog. It is not clear what sort of animals Demonosaurus evolved to prey upon. It is estimated to have been 1.5 meters long, although since it is known from little more than a skull from a potentially immature specimen, this estimate is unreliable. Demonosaurus is notable for living during the Radian Age, which was during the last 5 million years of the Triassic period, before Demonosaurus was found. It was assumed more archaic dinosaur lineages like the Herrerasaurs had already been outcompeted by their relatives. Still, the Herrerasaurs do not appear to have survived past the Triassic period, unless they did not form a true clade but were instead the earliest theropods. Even though there is a lot of uncertainty regarding which basal dinosaurs are theropods, the Triassic period was home to numerous unambiguous theropods, all of which belong to the theoretically smaller clade Neotheropoda. Fragmentary neotheropod fossils have been found in rocks which may have been formed during the late Carnian, but most are from the following Norine and Radian ages. The most famous Triassic theropod is Coelophysis. Its fossils are found in the Chinle Formation in the southwestern United States. Notably, over 1,000 Coelophysis skeletons have been found in a single site at Ghost Ranch. Combined with how many of these skeletons are complete, it is one of the most heavily researched of all dinosaurs. Fortunately, unlike the exceptional Tyrannosaurus, Rex Coelophysis is actually a good representative of the theropods of its time. It essentially looked like a more gracile version of Tawa compared to the Herrerasaurus Coelophysis, and the other early theropods were built for speed and agility over power. Atop its long neck was a thin, slender skull, well suited for striking small animals. It was able to reach a length of 3 meters and a height of 1 meter. Many adult Coelophysis were much smaller than this, which, like Herrerasaurus, was likely a result of the harsh environmental conditions. The Coelophysis found at Ghost Ranch seem to have been preserved together during a single event, and may have been once part of a massive flock. If so, Coelophysis would have needed to have been migratory to avoid rapidly exhausting its food supply. Models of Coelophysis thermodynamics found it was much more vulnerable to heat stress during the day than larger contemporary pseudo-Suchian predators. Like Postosuchus, this suggests Coelophysis was nocturnal, supporting this. A similar early Jurassic theropod, the unfortunately named Megapnosaurus, is thought to have been nocturnal, due to the size of its eyes, which are inferred from its sclerotic rings, seeing as the ancestors of the mammals were also already nocturnal. The predator-prey relationship between dinosaurs and mammals seen during the rest of the Mesozoic seems to have already been established long before the dinosaurs' reign began, at a time when the early theropods still coexisted with much larger synapsids. Many Triassic theropods, such as Eoraptor, were quite similar to Coelophysis in both size and lifestyle. However, other theropods continued to occupy the same niches as Eodromeus and Eoraptor. Examples of smaller Triassic theropods include Procompsognathus and Pendric, both of whom were only 1 meter long. An important distinction between early theropods was where they lived, although they eventually expanded to all of Pangaea. Triassic theropods were less successful in the equatorial low latitudes, and like Coelophysis seem to have been primarily nocturnal in the cooler high latitudes. The local theropods were equally comfortable hunting at day or night, and likewise obtained a greater maximum body size. One of these larger early theropods was the 4-meter-long Zooposaurus, who lived in Argentina. Despite its size, Zooposaurus was far from the spot of top predator, as it coexisted with what may have been the largest terrestrial predator of the entire Triassic period, the 7-meter-long Pseudosuchian Vasilosaucus. When Zooposaurus was first found, it was thought to have had a pair of crests on its skull. This was exciting, since many early Jurassic theropods like Dilophosaurus had similar crests, implying they were also common among their Triassic ancestors. However, later examination found that Zooposaurus's supposed crests were actually bone, which had been displaced after its death. It did have some cranial ornamentation above its eyes, but it was much more subtle. The largest Triassic theropod is generally held to be the European Lilian sternus, who is estimated to have been over 5 meters long despite this exceptional length. For an early theropod, its skull and skeleton were still more lightly built than those of the stockier Herrerasaurus, the contemporary Suzukian carnivores, and equally long specimens of early Jurassic predators like Dilophosaurus, who, it should be noted, could grow much larger. There are a few theropods from this period that may have been larger than Lilian sternus, but none of them are without controversy. Some sources cite the largest Triassic theropod as the 5-meter-long Gojirasaurus, who is named after the movie monster Godzilla, a contemporary of Coelophysis. Gojirasaurus is notably the only large Triassic theropod from the low latitudes. Since it is only known from immature specimens, it likely grew even larger. However, Gojirasaurus may be a chimera, meaning it is a collection of bones from several different species, and its validity as a genus is in doubt. Still, at least some of the bones assigned to it do appear to be genuinely from a theropod, substantially larger than Coelophysis. Another contender for the largest Triassic theropod is the bone-crushing smock, who is the apex predator of Poland at the very end of the Triassic period. While this would be quite the achievement for such an early theropod, it is unclear whether Smoke was a dinosaur or something else. Its skeleton is incomplete and contains a mixture of traits found in theropods, pseudosuchians, and other more primitive argosauromorphs. Although the Triassic period may have had a few large theropod dinosaurs, the current evidence suggests that until the dawn of the Jurassic period, the iconic image most people have of the meat-eating theropods as apex predators seems to have remained a distant dream. On the other hand, many of the contemporary sauropodomorph dinosaurs were far from underdogs indeed. By the end of the Triassic period, they had already outgrown almost all of their local competition. Of course, even the first sauropodomorphs started out small. Like the other early dinosaurs, the oldest sauropodomorph fossils are primarily from South America, although a few have also been found in Zimbabwe. One of the most basal species was Brachiosaurus, another dinosaur from the Brazilian Santa Maria Formation. Brachiosaurus was unsurprisingly quite theropod-like. Its brain case is the best preserved of any early dinosaur. The endocast shows that the part of Berriolestes' brain used for tracking prey with its eyes was enlarged, while its sense of smell was lacking compared to the later plant-eating sauropods combined with its sharp recurved and serrated teeth, which are called zyphodont teeth. It is clear this early sauropodomorph was a carnivore. However, Berriolestes was very different from the local Herrerasaurus. It was only 1.5 meters long, about the size of a fox. Its head was also proportionally smaller than most other early dinosaurs. While this prevented it from hunting larger animals, Berriolestes could easily make rapid strikes. When trying to catch small prey, although once thought to be the first theropod, the relatively famous Eoraptor is now considered a basal sauropodomorph. Some of its teeth were zyphodont, but others resembled the leaf-shaped teeth of herbivores, which led to the idea that Eoraptor was an omnivore. However, a recent study analyzing the teeth of early dinosaurs found Eoraptor to be a pure carnivore, as was thought to be the case when it was first found. The shift to a plant-based diet can instead be seen in the more derived sauropodomorph Saturnalia, whose teeth were intermediate between those of Eoraptor and later sauropodomorphs. It also had a much longer torso than Eoraptor, which was a deceptively important evolutionary innovation. Sauropods were hindgut fermenters, relying on microbes in their massive intestines to break down the cellulose in their food. This method of digestion requires a huge gut and becomes more efficient the larger it is, which Saturnalia's larger torso helped to accomplish. Although it had already evolved many traits crucial in the evolution of herbivory, Saturnalia's neural anatomy and some of its teeth were still adapted for hunting other animals. Many other sauropodomorphs were omnivores like Saturnalia, although some like Brachiosaurus continued to shift towards a herbivorous diet. Despite early success in the southern hemisphere, most of these basal sauropodomorphs were extinct after the Carnian age, having been replaced by their larger and more derived prosauropod descendants. However, there was at least one late survivor named Thechodontosaurus, who was evolutionarily in between the small Carnian sauropodomorphs and the then dominant prosauropods. This 2-meter-long dinosaur lived in Britain at the very end of the Triassic period, and like the prosauropods was a herbivore. Unlike them, Thechodontosaurus's primary form of defense was the swift speed it retained from its ancestors, although it also possessed large hand claws. After the Carnian age, the prosauropods were the dominant sauropodomorphs for the rest of the Triassic period. The traits that set them apart were already apparent in the early prosauropod macrocolumn, who lived 225 million years ago. Their necks had become incredibly long, which allowed them to access foliage in the trees unavailable to the other contemporary herbivores. On the other hand, prosauropod heads were proportionately tiny to avoid placing too much weight on their necks. Longer necks also allowed prosauropods to forage from vast areas without moving most of their bodies in the long term. This helps sauropods keep up with the energy demands of their massive bodies, but this would not have been possible had the small Triassic predators like Berriolestes not become small prey specialists. Although prosauropod skulls were still notably longer than those of the later sauropods, unlike Berriolestes, they could no longer be mistaken for theropods. The prosauropods had large hand claws which may have been used to manipulate tree branches or for self-defense. This would have been important since they were not as fast as before, having become more cumbersome due to possessing even larger guts. All of this allowed the sauropodomorph dinosaurs to be incredibly effective browsers of the treetops. The basal macro column was 3.5 meters long, a fairly respectable size for the time, but quaint compared to most of its successors. They were the only group of dinosaurs who matched and outright exceeded the size of their contemporaries. Some of the largest prosauropods were the lessensaurids, who were very closely related to the true sauropods. The largest Triassic species Ingentia had a length of 10 meters and a staggering weight of 10 tons, greater than today's elephants. After prosauropods came onto the scene, the only Triassic animal to match the size of their largest specimens was the Polish Descenidante. Lisawikia, an isolated fossil of the Carnian Pseudosuchian Silosuchus, suggested could grow up to 9 to 10 meters long, although it was already extinct before the evolution of the prosauropods. Despite prosauropods often being reconstructed walking on 4 legs like their sauropod descendants, the majority of them were not capable of pronating their forelimbs, since this is necessary for efficient quadrupedal locomotion. Most prosauropods were obligate bipeds. Some bipedal prosauropods, such As the early Jurassic Mesospondylus and Mosasaurus did walk on all fours as hatchlings, while this gives insight into how the sauropods eventually transitioned to four-legged locomotion. The arms of these hatchlings were still not pronated, so they would not have actually been very good at walking. Combined with their lack of teeth, these baby dinosaurs must have been reliant on their parents, much like many modern dinosaurs. Only the saurids and a few other Triassic prosauropods, very closely related to the sauropods such as Melanosaurus, were able to properly walk on all fours. Their four limbs were flexed. A relic from when they were arms, sauropods instead evolved columnar limbs which were much better at supporting their increasingly extreme weight, while the oldest unambiguous body fossils of true sauropods are from the early Jurassic tracks left by Triassic sauropodomorphs with columnar and limbs have been found in Greenland, which may have been left by true sauropods. The most famous Triassic sauropodomorph is easily Plateosaurus, who was one of the first dinosaurs discovered. At least 3 species of Plateosaurus lived in Europe between 214 to 204 million years ago. There is very good evidence that this dinosaur lived in herds over 100 Plateosaurus skeletons. Some of them complete have been found together in the German Trosengen Formation. Additionally, 3 macrocolumn specimens have been found together, suggesting it may have been common for prosauropods to live in herds much as it was for their sauropod descendants. The largest Plateosaurus individuals reached a length of 10 meters and a weight of 4 tons. But like many other early dinosaurs, many adults of the same species were much smaller, while, far from defenseless, these smaller Plateosaurus were still potential prey of pseudosuchian predators, and the fellow dinosaur Liliensternus Plateosaurus is an example of just how widespread sauropodomorphs had become. While once restricted to the southern hemisphere, the prosauropods had managed to spread to the north 15 million years ago, where they thrived. However, they remained absent in the equatorial regions, at least in part due to their recently acquired bulk, making them far more vulnerable to overheating. Most evolutionary trees agree that the third major brands of Dinosauria ornithischia must have evolved at the same time as the theropods, and probably even earlier. Until recently, the oldest unambiguous ornithischian fossils were from the early Jurassic, which created an ornithischian ghost lineage over 30 million years long. Fortunately, the mystery of the missing Triassic ornithischians seems to have recently been solved. An increasing number of paleontologists have concluded that the Silosaurids accolade of dinosaur morphs common during the late Triassic were actually the first ornithischian dinosaurs, since the later ornithischians are thought to have been directly descended from Silosaurids. Sauride is not a true clade. Its former members have instead been given the informal name Stylosaurs, while all but one of the traditional ornithischians belong to a derived clade named Pranodontia. While it will take time to see if this hypothesis becomes widely accepted, it will be assumed that the Silosaurs are basal ornithischian dinosaurs for the purposes of this video. The Silosaurus looks similar to Aphanosaurs but with longer legs and a more grace. All build like the earlier Ernestadorans. They were primarily quadrupeds, but their forelimbs were used for support rather than propelling them forward. This has been used as evidence that these primitive ornithischians may have been able to run on only 2 legs. The later Prionodons were ancestrally obligate bipeds, since the same was true of most Triassic dinosaurs and closely related dinosaur morphs, such as Marsupials. It has generally been held the first dinosaur was also a biped. The primarily 4-legged stance of the Silosaurs may argue against this, although this may have been a derived feature that was reversed by their Jurassic descendants since they were early members of the clade. Silosaurs lack most of the features originally used to define ornithischia. Ornithischia means bird-hipped in reference to how their pubis points backwards like in Birds Beyond. This ornithischian hips have little resemblance to bird hips, and a backward-pointing pubis evolved independently in other dinosaur lineages, including the actual ancestors of birds. Silosaur pubises instead point forwards, which is the ancestral condition among reptiles. Another important feature not present in the first ornithischians is the predentary bone. This bone supported the beak on their lower jaws and is unique to the clade. However, the end of the lower jaw of most Silosaurs resembles a predentary bone. It likely filled a similar function and was its evolutionary predecessor. Much like with the sauropodomorph dinosaurs, there was a shift from carnivory to herbivory among the Triassic or Nephesians. Basalosaurs like Luisukis were very small, predators with zyphodon's teeth. Later xylosaurs like Silosaurus itself were a bit larger and ate both plants and insects. The derived silosaur, Coelophysis, was the most dedicated plant eater among the silosaurs. Its teeth were diamond-shaped with coarse denticules. The typical shape of the prionidant ornithischians of the early Jurassic, one of the most derived Triassic ornithischians, was Basanosaurus. Before the hypothesis that silosaurs are basal, ornithischians gained much acceptance. It was repeatedly reassigned between each group, a testament to them being one and the same. Although Personosaurus is not well enough preserved to determine whether it more closely resembled silosaurs or the early Jurassic ornithischians, it was evolutionarily between the two, since Personosaurus lived around the middle of the Triassic and the first prionodont. Fossils are from the very beginning of the early Jurassic. It is probable the more derived ornithischians evolved before the end of the Triassic period. Indeed, the prionodont Eocursor may have actually lived during the end of the Triassic period, although the exact age of the rocks it was found in is currently debated. Therefore, it and the early Jurassic ornithischians will be covered here as proxies for their slightly older Triassic ancestors. They were primarily herbivores, although a recent study of the pranodont Lesothosaurus found it, and perhaps some other early ornithischians may have been omnivores eating insects and other fauna. When the opportunity presented itself in this regard, they had not changed that much from their silosaur ancestors. Unlike Silosaurus periana, femurs were shorter than their tibias, which is typical of animals built for speed. There is evidence that at least some of these dinosaurs lived in herds, since numerous skeletons of Lesothosaurus have been found together in a single bone bed, a notable clade of early Jurassic ornithischians, or their heterodontosaurids. These dinosaurs had distinctive fang-like tusks at the front of their mouths, which are thought to have been used in fights against each other over mates and territory. These large, sharp teeth were once believed to have been holdovers from their carnivorous ancestors. But due to their absence in silosaurs and other basal ornithischians, this is no longer considered likely. The most primitive early Jurassic ornithischian was Laquintosaura, who is just outside of Periodontia, but also not a silosaur, since a complete Laquintosaurus skeleton hasn't yet been found. It is currently unknown whether or not it had a predentary bone, although its longer legs suggest a bipedal gait like its contemporaries. To summarize the various types of Triassic dinosaurs, the first species were small carnivores. Most theropods and Herrerasaurs remained small to medium-sized predators. A few grew larger, but even they seem to have remained consistently overshadowed by larger archosaurs. The sauropodomorph dinosaurs shifted from a carnivorous diet to a herbivorous one, and afterwards grouch become the only truly massive Triassic dinosaurs. The smaller ornithischian dinosaurs also became plant eaters. Most Triassic ornithischians were four-legged silosaurs, although the bipedal prionodons had likely already evolved before the Jurassic dinosaurs were geographically limited to the southern hemisphere. 233 million years ago. Since early dinosaur fossils are most common in South America, it is suspected that they first evolved there by 215 million years ago. Dinosaurs had not only become more abundant, but had also spread throughout the entire world. They were smaller and less common at low latitudes, but Triassic dinosaur fossils and footprints become more common the closer the region once was to the North and South poles. Notably, the environment preserved in the Ishigualsto Formation, the home of many of the first dinosaurs, was very cold. The upper estimates for the temperature only come to 11 degrees Celsius or about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. While few Triassic body fossils have been found in the poles themselves, their footprints indicate they were most abundant there. One of these Triassic polar sites is the Younger Basin in northwestern China, which was within the Arctic Circle 200 million years ago. Notably, debris that had been characteristically moved by ice was found among the sediment there, indicating the prehistoric lake. There periodically froze since global temperatures were higher during the Triassic. Even the poles were not tundra, but cool, humid, temperate forests. Even so, this is remarkably different from the common image of dinosaurs, who are often envisioned living in tropical environments, although it has been known for some time that they also inhabited the colder Arctic and Antarctic. Polar dinosaurs were treated as exceptional. Now it appears dinosaurs started out as cold climate specialists and then moved to the tropics. The dinosaurs were able to survive in such places, in part due to their high metabolism. Producing their own body heat allowed them to keep warm in spite of the external environment. Some other orca, sauromorphs including the pseudosuchians, also had high metabolisms and could be found in high latitudes. However, they were reliant on the ability to hibernate during the winter. Dinosaurs were able to be active throughout the year due to their secret weapon feathers. While it has been known that many theropods had feathers since 1996, primitive feathers have also been found in ornithischians, such as Chanyulong, and even the closest relatives of the dinosaurs to survive to the Jurassic period. The pterosaurs. All of this suggests the very first dinosaurs had simple feathers. It is thought these primitive feathers originally evolved to provide thermal insulation, the heat produced by the body of an endothermic or mesothermic animal like a dinosaur is eventually lost to the environment. This process becomes quicker. The smaller the animal and the colder the external environment. A covering of proto-feathers would have meant the Triassic dinosaurs could maintain a high body temperature, even when it was freezing. Although no Triassic dinosaur fossil is in good enough condition to determine what its outer covering was. Like a recent study which modeled the thermodynamics of early dinosaurs, found that most of them would have not been able to even survive without the thermal insulation feathers provided. This even extends to Coelophysis. Despite its native environment being much warmer than its higher latitude cousins. Even though the first dinosaurs likely had feathers, large, fluffy coats were not retained in all of their descendants. This is best demonstrated by the extensive scale impressions found on many late Cretaceous hadrosaurs. The massive Triassic prosauropods were already so large that they likely lost their feathery coats to avoid overheating, much like how many of today's similarly sized mammals have lost most of their fur. Although thermal insulation can remain useful or even outright necessary for large animals in sufficiently cold environments, the polar Triassic forests were still a far cry from the frigid landscapes that later produced the likes of the woolly mammoth. Even without insulation, larger prosauropods would have struggled in the tropics, likely explaining their absence there. Whether or not the Herrerasaurus or the largest Triassic theropods had feathers remains unexplored. However, the largest known feathered dinosaur, the Tyrannosauroid Utaranus, was larger than even the most massive theropods from not just the Triassic period but from the early Jurassic as well. Its native environment in early Cretaceous China experienced cold winters, not unlike those endured by many of its Triassic predecessors at high latitudes, suggesting they needed feathery coats as well. The role of the dinosaurs during the Triassic was very different from those of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. But understanding them also requires understanding what changed to allow the age of dinosaurs to happen. It was once thought the dinosaurs gradually replaced most of their competition, who were perceived as comparatively primitive. It is true many of the more basal archosauromorphs, particularly those with lower metabolisms, did become extinct as the Triassic period progressed and were replaced by archosaurs. However, most of the replacements were pseudosuchians, not dinosaurs. Instead, the rise of the dinosaurs was much more opportunistic. Rather than driving the incumbent of a niche to extinction, they merely took over when the previous holder was wiped out by something else. This was actually something of an archosauromorph tradition. They only became so successful in the first place due to the synapses being devastated by the Permian mass extinction and the resulting fragility of the unpredictable early Triassic ecosystems. The dinosaurs' first big break was during the Carnian age, when volcanic activity increased for a period of about 2 million years. Among the effects on the global environment was a spike in global humidity, called the Carnian pluvial event. The changing climate led to the extinction of numerous species. This may have been responsible for the downfall of the Herrerasaurus and Basosauropodomorphs, but many of the other vacant niches were filled by dinosaurs. They then slowly became more common for the rest of the Triassic period, but remained underdogs to their pseudosuchian cousins. This changed to a one. Anisms could endure when this volcanic activity finally ended 600,000 years later. 76% of all species have been driven to extinction. Almost all of the pseudosuchians perished during the Triassic mass extinction, with the only survivors being small crocodilomorphs like Sphenosuchus. Likewise, besides the flying pterosaurs, almost all of the other non-dinosaurian archosauromorphs were wiped out along with the dicynodons and most of the large amphibians. In contrast, an unusual number of dinosaurs survived the mass extinction, including some of their largest representatives. That is not to say they came out completely unscathed. Herrerasaurs and Silosaur ornithischians were rendered entirely extinct. Still, the early Jurassic dinosaurs were not simply the descendants of a handful of species that got lucky. Multiple branches of Theropoda and Sauropodomorpha managed to survive a mass extinction that wiped out all other terrestrial animals of remotely comparable size. Part of the reason for this seemingly miraculous survival of so many large dinosaurs was their location. The eruptions that caused the mass extinction were at the equator. While most dinosaurs were concentrated closer to the poles, of course, dinosaurs were not the only large animals there, but they did have another advantage, one which made them largely immune to another, and until recently underappreciated killer behind the intrinsic mass extinction. The ash and debris from the largest volcanic eruptions remain in the atmosphere for some time, blocking so much sunlight that even with more CO2 reflecting it, back to Earth temperatures fell drastically. These volcanic winters could have easily lasted 10 years at the tropical equator. Temperatures may have dropped to below freezing levels, something most of the local fauna would have been completely unprepared for. In contrast, the dinosaurs' feathers meant they were uniquely predisposed towards surviving these suddenly colder conditions. Furthermore, with their malleable growth rates, younger dinosaurs would have been able to stop growing during the resulting famine. The largest species of Triassic dinosaurs may have survived due to their ability to stay small. To summarize, the dinosaurs ruled the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods not because they were superior to other reptiles, but because their ancestors happened to be better suited to survive a random and geologically brief disaster at the end of the Triassic period. This mirrors how one group of synapsids would later replace the dinosaurs, indeed the early mammals, and the remaining crocodilomorphs would have otherwise been in a great position to take over the new Jurassic world, if not for the fact that the dinosaurs were already significantly larger and therefore able to fill most of the empty niches before the rest of the survivors had a chance to make much progress. Mammals and a few other cyanodons would remain in the shadows until the Cenozoic era, although they were highly diverse. The largest Mesozoic mammals were only as large as a badger, and most were far smaller. The remaining Pseudosuchians had far better luck reclaiming the niches of their ancestors. Some of them took advantage of the extinction of the semi-aquatic phytosaurs, giving rise to the crocodilians, including a number of massive dinosaur killers. Many crocodilomorphs remained on land, and some of these eventually also managed to compete with the now dominant dinosaurs. The largest of these landcracks, Razan Andrew Gobi, was already a sizable dinosaur killer as early as the Middle Jurassic, echoing its extinct Triassic kin. Others, like the herbivorous Simasuchus, followed new evolutionary paths. Likewise, the fellow Archosaurian Pterosaurs grew in diversity, while they largely remained small during the Jurassic period. Cretaceous pterosaurs became some of the only other large terrestrial animals. Besides dinosaurs, some became the largest creatures to ever fly, and in some cases were terrors on land as well. Still, although there were some exceptions, nearly all large terrestrial animals were dinosaurs. For the next 135 million years, the age of dinosaurs had truly begun. Sauropodomorph. Dinosaurs quickly expanded into the tropic. Sauropods were the most successful there and were the largest dinosaurs of the early Jurassic, although they were not yet substantially larger than the largest Triassic sauropodomorphs. However, the cooler regions remained dominated by prosauropods very similar to those from the Triassic. It didn't take long for theropods like Coelophysis to grow large enough to hunt the largest of their distant kin, replacing the Pseudosuchians who had terrorized their own ancestors. Other early Jurassic theropods, such as Tachyrapt, held essentially the same niches as before. Some of them were once even classified as species of Coelophysis. The only thing that really changed for the smaller dinosaurs is that their predators now happen to be fellow dinosaurs rather than Pseudosuchians. All of the surviving ornithischian dinosaurs were the Prionodons, with the exception of the closely related Lachingdosaura, while the iconic Hadrosaurus and horned ceratopsids wouldn't evolve until the Cretaceous period. The ornithischi unclaved Thyreophore had already developed bony armor. Soon the theriophorans Skeletosaurus became quadrupedal, to better support its greater size, replacing the now extinct pseudosuchian atosaurs. Still, the smaller, bipedal ornithesians stuck around to the very end of the Mesozoic era, living much as their primeval ancestors had. However, this was an exception. Although the early Jurassic dinosaurs were similar to those of the Triassic, except for those who had replaced their extinct competition by the Middle Jurassic, they had come to exceed them. The sauropods grew more massive than anything before or since, while the prosauropods declined and finally became extinct. Likewise, a single plate of theropods, Eoraptor, had replaced all others by the late Jurassic. They seem to have been descended from large Dilophosaurus-like predators, but soon went on to include small carnivores, as well as omnivores, herbivores, and of course birds from the late Jurassic. Onwards, few dinosaurs could be mistaken for their Triassic ancestors. Of course, even though giant dinosaurs are the most iconic, the majority of the Jurassic and Cretaceous dinosaurs remain small, with almost no competition. These small dinosaurs were actually more abundant and diverse than the dinosaurs of the Triassic, but if it were not for those early dinosaurs, the great radiation of Dinosauria would have never happened, and the current multitude of birds would not exist. The Triassic dinosaurs placed the evolution of Dinosauria into context for all their fame. They started out as just one of many clades of reptiles at a time, when not all of their competition even were reptiles, but within 30 million years, they went from a geographically isolated group of tiny carnivores to a diverse array of species, which served as the foundation of nearly all the later megafauna for well over 100 million years. Before then, they thrived in climates most other reptiles shunned, and almost single-handedly invented an entirely new class of large herbivore. Although they were fewer in number than later dinosaurs, those dinosaurs which did exist during the Triassic period were equally remarkable animals. Thank you for watching, and a thank you to the Mandalorian for narrating this video. Also, a thank you to Bethany Luster for creating this illustration, depicting Triassic dinosaurs in a snowy environment in the high latitudes. Without her, there would not have been any visual depictions of Triassic dinosaurs in such surroundings. This is particularly important since such temperate, seasonally chilly environments were where they thrived during the Triassic period. I hope this video has achieved its aim to give an effective overview of the Triassic dinosaurs and sparked interest in learning even more. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Finally, be sure to have a great day.